Watch Oversimplified. Oversimplified Cold War. That would make sense. Thank you for the sub, Zeros. Cold War Part 1.
I've decided that in order to sell more merch, I should do a face reveal wearing some of it. So are you ready? Here we go. Boom. New Minimalist and Cold War merch available now. And get the new limited edition Churchill character pin sells out. With more characters coming in the future. Link in the description down below.
Okay, let's check Oversimplified.
The year 1917. Fighting rages on the Eastern Front of the First World War. Both Germany and Russia are on the brink of collapse. Soldier, I need you to bring me this man. Got it. Found him, sir. What? No, not Lenin. Lenin, the Russian communist. What? Why would I need a beetle? Lenin, the Russian communist. He was exiled to Switzerland. You know what? I'll do it myself. Who wants to start a revolution?
Did they actually do that? I didn't know. The Germans were getting Lenin, so he starts a revolution in Russia, so they can fuck Russia easier? I have know nothing about history, apparently, yeah? That's very genius by Germany. So why did Germany lose World War I? If all these Germans from the Eastern Front went to the West Front, wouldn't they actually... Why did we lose? Because of that fucking rebellion with the Navy people, right? Basically USA. Oh, USA. The USA fucked us again? Jeez.
The Germans put Lenin on a train and sent him all the way back to Russia, hoping he and his mates would create an internal crisis. And create an internal crisis they did. The government was overthrown,
did not know that.
And Lenin was in charge. He immediately pulled out of the First World War, made the country communist, started a 3-year-long civil war.
Oh, Germany, you self-fucked yourself there! The Germans are actually responsible for the Soviet Union? What? Actually? Dude, that's a self-fuck.
Got shot, broke the economy, caused a famine, and then he died. On his deathbed he said, "Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir." Stalin was a rising force in the Communist Party. He still had some opponents, but conveniently, all of them were arrested or disappeared. So that was lucky.
Basic
and so Stalin
Putin
took over.
style?
He implemented his 5-year plans, which transformed the country from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And like Lenin before him, he reigned with terror. Anyone who dared criticize or oppose him would either be killed or left to rot in the horrendous Soviet work camps. Then a short man with a silly mustache tried to take over the world, punched the Russians all the way to Moscow, and then the Russians, with some help from their faithful ally, the Winter, punched them all the way back to Berlin. At this point, being allies, America, the UK, and the Soviet Union were good chums. They held a couple of conferences near the end of the war to decide what would happen next. Hey Stalin, after all your trials and tribulation, you must be pretty happy to be standing here in Berlin. Tsar Alexander made it all the way to Paris. Hey, just...
He didn't actually say that. That's a joke, right? He didn't say that. Make it louder? He didn't actually say that.
Give me a second. Hey man, I think something's up.
He actually said that? I'm learning so much already. He actually said that?
I know, right? What should we do? Shall I tell him about the bomb?
Geez.
Yeah, tell him about the bomb. That will scare him.
Oh, wait, you're blowing my mind. Stalin had a big mouth and was planning to go deeper to Paris, but then he realized they have the nuclear weapon?
So, we got this crazy new big A-bomb that can destroy an entire city in one go. Yes, my spies told me already. Oh wait, I meant to act surprised. Wow, that's amazing.
Jeez.
He already knew. How? Am I sure I want to send nuclear secrets via unsecure public coffee shop Wi-Fi? Am I ever? Dude,
holy shit,
use a VPN.
man.
And speaking of VPNs, if, like me, you take internet safety seriously, then you need NordVPN. NordVPN hides your
It's funny because my next commercial on my next YouTube video is also a NordVPN.
activities from outside intruders, preventing anyone from stealing your personal data and stopping your service provider selling your data to advertisers. With over 5,000 servers 50%. In 62 countries, it allows you to surf the net anonymously and securely. And it's simple to use. With just the click of a button, you can connect to a server halfway across the world, even allowing you to access streaming services from that specific territory. Say, for example, you wanted to watch a certain oversimplified video that for some reason has been blocked in your country. With
Dude,
NordVPN.
I finally get why you guys always want me to watch oversimplified videos. You guys love history, right? It's a history channel, Hoi 4. This is great for us, man.
It works seamlessly across PC,
leader,
mobile,
Thank you,
and tablet. Go to nordvpn.com/oversimplified to get an amazing 75% off. That's just $2.99 per month, with an additional month free for a limited time. So
very
again,
good ad by him, but I think nordvpn.com/TommyKay is much more sexy.
That's nordvpn.com/oversimplified, also in the description box down below. Now
Wait, that blue hair is actually the real NordVPN logo?
were we?
What?
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Does the A stand for atomic or ass? Then America dropped their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end. Hooray! We won! Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these
Did he actually say yes to that? Did he actually act like, yeah, I'm gonna do that?
elections will be free.
If this is kind of true, man, Stalin was a fucking asshole, dude. He actually did
Fair,
that?
right? Oh yes, certainly. Free and fair. Definitely free and fair. Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout Eastern Europe, Soviet puppet governments were
Drinking steam.
established as a buffer zone between the USSR and the West, with Churchill proclaiming an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent. The relationship between the old allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years, the British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover. In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea access routes, which prompted the US to send their largest battleship to Turkey for a friendly visit. After World War II, Iran was
I gotta be honest, I'm learning so much here, man. I don't know much about this shit. This is learning me. I'm learning like 5 facts a second.
now occupied by both the Soviets and the British, with an agreement to both pull out once the war was over. The British pulled out. Stalin was like, you know what? I think I might stick around. All in favor of kicking Russia out of Iran? You want to know something? You guys suck. Pressure from the UN forced
Fucking
the Soviets
Stalin,
to leave,
man.
and with
That
the
guy was a
establishment of NATO,
meddler.
the Soviets had no doubt that the West was out to encircle and destroy them. And America announced the Truman Doctrine, in which they basically said, those guys are not cool, cannot be trusted, and we will do everything we can to prevent the spread of communism around the world. Many viewed this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War. Back in Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to...
What is? I want to say something. What's weird to me as a German is, I know nothing about the rebuilding phase. Whenever a German goes to a museum and learns about its history, we never talk or see pictures of the rebuild phase. You see the pictures of destroyed Germany, but you never see, like, old people, they never talk about the build-up. It's like it just happened. It's a bit weird to explain. I know what a build-up, but I never... This process of rebuilding, no one ever talks about it. There's no videos, no pictures.
rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great.
It's to
The
keep
more
you
they suffer,
demoralized.
the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely. America realized what was going on.
I think
and
maybe
quickly
Germans
made a
understand
move.
what
Under the Marshall Plan,
mean
they
here.
sent $12 billion to Western Europe for its economic recovery. The countries of Stalin's Eastern Bloc looked on with envy. Hey, Czechoslovakia, you want to come get some economic aid? Yeah, but I have to check with my mom first.
Money is a good thing, dude.
Sorry, America. I can't
You have to
come.
be careful with
This
these
was
videos.
a full-on
Why?
economic battle raging between capitalism and communism in Europe. If the Western nations developed faster and better than the East, that would be a defeat
Gamer.
for Stalin. So he set up his own rival economic recovery plan.
Wait.
You're still in Discord, Tommy. You're in Discord, Tommy.
That's his big moment here, man. Fucker. That was his...
Which he called
okay.
Comic-Con. And he also set up Cominform, which gave him more political control over the Eastern Bloc. But nowhere did this economic battle rage harder
Thank you,
than in the
Kuchenberg,
city
man.
of Berlin. Caught over 100 miles behind Soviet lines, the city had been divided up between the Allies, and the West
The funny thing about Berlin is, I live 1 hour away from this. The people that live in the blue line are actually encircled, but they always had a very big mouth towards the rest. Like the West Berlin people, they would always shit on the East Berlin people. They would literally, there's movies about this. They would always be on the wall and be like, haha, look at the East Germans, look at these idiots, even though they are encircled. I never understood that.
Western segments
you're the
were
one
still under
encircled.
Western control. East Berliners could travel freely to West Berlin, see the economic prosperity, and think, maybe this communism thing ain't so great after all. I'm gonna have fun.
Oh.
You're home late. Oh, Stalin. I was just out with my friends. Friends? You stink of capitalism! You're out engaging in imperialist debauchery again! I swear, Ivan, I can't keep doing this. Stalin wanted the West out, so he said, hey, guess what? I'm blockading all of your supply routes to West Berlin. What are you gonna do about it? I suppose we'll just fly this
Bomber. In a weird way, this is so interesting. I have so many questions and stuff. We Germans have to kind of be very thankful to America. Like, first we fought each other and killed each other, and then the Americans kind of built us up. And that's what I always say when I say, you Americans, America, you guys have such a great country. You guys did so much good shit, and now you guys fuck each other over Trump and Biden, man. Always fucking over a mask and all this bullshit, man. So sad to see you guys like this, USA. Sad to see you guys like this.
All right, Truman, you win this round. The Berlin Airlift was an incredible undertaking and a major success for the Western Allies, and Stalin ended his blockade of West Berlin. His aggressive actions worried the West, but not as much as this did.
Oh, they have a nuclear weapon?
The Soviet Union had developed their very own atomic...
My question is, how did the Soviet Union get the nuke? Like, in detail. Did the scientists find their own way? Did they steal information from the US? How did they get it? Spies. Imagine that. You get the nuke because your spies did a good job in the US. That is fucking... I always felt like Russia has a really good spy network, man. Their spy system, their spy culture is very big. They had spies in the Manhattan Project. Wow. I mean, these spies, man, they changed the world, man.
Bomb. The USA no longer had a nuclear monopoly. The world...
Russia still must have many, many spies everywhere in the world.
The world now knew that if a major war broke out between the two superpowers, it would be more destructive than anyone could imagine. So it was comforting when Stalin came out and said that war between the Soviet Union and the West was unlikely. Oh, wait, inevitable. He said it was inevitable. Hey,
what?
You know who I haven't checked in on in a while? My good friend China. Whoa, what happened to you? What happened to them was a full-blown civil war that had been going on since 1927. The People's Liberation Army, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, successfully defeated the Republic of China, who fled to Taiwan. The now communist...
Yeah, after the Republic of China defended China's ass from the Japanese, and Mr. Mao sit in his little mountain of Yan'an and stab them in the back, stealing their guns and shit, man. What a fucking hero Mao is, huh?
China and the Soviet Union signed a mutual defense treaty. This was terrible news for the West. But wait. There's more. After the Second World War, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets set up a communist regime. In the south, America set up an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Korea under their own regime. Now that he had the bomb, Stalin...
In a way, when you look at human history, especially the last 100 years, 200 years, it's mostly single characters determining the fate of millions. It's Stalin, Hitler, it's these two Korean guys who are like, oh, I want to unite. It's always these one single characters that change the fate of everyone, you know? It always was like this, yeah. Like, it shows you that, you know, leaders are a bad thing.
Stalin was feeling a little more cocky, and he finally gave Kim permission to attack. The North launched a surprise invasion of the South on June 25, 1950. With Soviet aid, the North Koreans steamrolled through, taking Seoul in just 3 days and replacing one ruthless dictator with another.
Jeez.
The UN were freaking out and quickly created an emergency force made up of troops from 16 countries to defend the South. The West still held Busan and made landings at Incheon near Seoul. They pushed the North Koreans out of Seoul, replacing the ruthless dictator that had replaced the first ruthless dictator with the same ruthless dictator that had previously been replaced.
The Korea War is also a war I don't know much about.
And the West then continued all the way up the Korean Peninsula. At this point, China was getting worried that the UN may just keep going. The US had sent this guy to lead the operation. After winning the Pacific Theater of World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's head was big, and his balls were bigger. He reassured President Truman that there was absolutely no way at all that the Chinese would ever get involved. Meanwhile, 500,000 Chinese troops were crossing into Korea. Nuke 'em. No. Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on. You're fired. The US considered the nuclear option, but now that the...
They actually did what? They considered a nuclear option on China? That would have triggered a fucking final war, though, that ended the world,
Soviets
man.
also had the bomb. They didn't want to risk all-out global destruction. The communists pushed the West right back almost to the exact same spot they had all started from, and they ended up in a stalemate, where they remained until both sides finally agreed to work towards a peace settlement in 2018. Back in America, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected famed World War II General Eisenhower.
I always felt like Eisenhower is like the easiest. Can someone tell me how many electoral votes did Eisenhower get? That guy must have gotten millions. A true American war hero that led the World War II assault, man. That guy must have won so heavy. He had 500 electoral votes, man. That guy must have like an easy run, man. I mean, with a history like this, I would vote for him. Jeez.
Who was really hard to draw.
That guy won World War II,
It's
man.
1953. Hey, Stalin. How you doing? Oh, he's dead. He had a cerebral hemorrhage and his reign of terror kinda came back to bite him in the ass because he had imprisoned all of his best doctors and those that were left were too terrified to treat him. The new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, called a meeting and said, "Hey guys, you know how Stalin was imprisoning and murdering us all for doing basically nothing? Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. I'm really not sure how this is news to you." Khrushchev went on a campaign of de-Stalinization. Statues of Stalin were taken down, Stalingrad was renamed, and Khrushchev announced that he wanted the Soviet people to be happy and would allow greater freedom in the Soviet Union.
Like an intelligent
So how
man.
did that work out? Well, an uprising in East Germany was brutally suppressed. A revolution in...
There was an uprising in East... What? This is mind-blowing me. 1953 East German uprising. There was an uprising in East Germany? I lived there. Volksaufstand von 17. Juni was an uprising that occurred in East Germany in 1607. It began with a strike action by construction workers in East Berlin on 16 June against work quotas during the Sovietization process in East Germany. Demonstrations in East Berlin turned into widespread uprising against the government and the Socialist Party the next day, involving an estimated more than 1 million in about 700 blah, 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 blah. The protest against declining living standards and unpopular Sovietization policies led to a wave of strikes and protests that were not easily brought under control and threatened to overthrow the East German government. The uprising in East Berlin was violently suppressed by tanks of the Soviet forces in Germany. Dude, if anyone, Feedback Gaming, if you guys remember being in Berlin with me when we saw that Russian tank, I think there was a monument to that. Dude, I don't even know that, man. That literally happened an hour away from me. Dude.
In Hungary was brutally suppressed, and demonstrations in Poland were brutally suppressed.
Yeah, nobody wanted communism.
Although he did finally allow some mild reforms. Back in the Soviet Union, he permitted...
Like, imagine that. These people were fighting, throwing away their lives to leave communism so that their grandchildren one day walk through the cities, spray the walls, and want communism back, man. Isn't that sad, dude?
More cultural expression, but then began banning stuff based on his own personal taste. Modern art looks like a child urinated on a canvas. Banned. Jazz music sounds like the feeling of needing to fart. Banned. Your poetry is really depressing. How could anyone in the Soviet Union be depressed? You're banned. Khrushchev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but not like that, or that, or that. Young people began enjoying abhorrent Western pop culture. Son, remove that disgusting imperialist apparel at once.
That's very interesting. When I live in China, Chinese people have that now. Young Chinese people have this Western thing about them. Like they're rebelling against this
Shut
stuff.
up, Dad. You can't tell me what to do. Well, would you look at that? Turns out he
can
tell me what to do. The West had initially liked the cut of Khrushchev's jib, but world events soon soured relations even more. The two sides were spying on each other a whole lot throughout the Cold War. The KGB had spies and informants in nearly every aspect of Western life and government, so much so that whenever the US tried to send spies into the Soviet Union, the KGB were usually ready to arrest them on the spot.
Dude, like I said, man, the Russian spy network must be so good. Still nowadays, man. They must have people everywhere, man. Like high level, like you're telling me the Russians didn't do anything in the election or some shit, man? Bro, they're everywhere.
Members of the Manhattan Project aided the Soviet Union in acquiring the bomb. Some American officials believed they were on the wrong side. I'll sell you 3 secrets for $5 million. Okay, go ahead. The Allies are digging a tunnel under East Berlin to tap your communications. There's an American agent living at this address in Moscow, and sometimes, when I'm home alone, I like to put on my wife's dresses, sit in the corner, and cry for hours. Very interesting. In America,
even Putin was a KGB agent in Dresden, which is 30 minutes away from me. Like I talked to Lisa's dad about this. He knows. Putin was very active in my state where I lived
during the Red Scare and the McCarthy.
He was an agent here. Huh?
Trials. American values imploded as fear of communism collided with freedom of thought and expression, and communist kind of became a buzzword thrown around to describe anything people didn't like. Hollywood? Communist. Your next door neighbor's dog? Communist.
That's actually what Trump supporters do nowadays, yeah?
Das ist ganz lang und blond. Meins ist es ganz
Lisa found a long blonde hair. Now she thinks me and Dave.
Ja, klar geht's mir. Bitte.
She found a long blonde hair. Oh god, now she knows. Dave, you should have cut your hair, man. Bald? Well, apparently I have long blonde hair. Yeah, this is kind of what Trump supporters are using nowadays, right?
When the grocery store cashier asks if you need a bag when you clearly can't carry 10 tubs of baconaise in your hands, communist. But one area in particular where the US had an edge over the Soviet Union was in its espionage technology. In particular, U-2 spy planes flew across Russia carrying out surveillance from the skies. There was a nasty incident in 1960 though, when one was shot down and Khrushchev was furious. Who the hell is this? He's up. high-altitude weather enthusiast who flew off course. Okay, that sounds plausible. Wait a minute.
That's
Why
like
does he have a
me
gun
in
and a
Switzerland,
poison needle?
some hours ago.
He's a very naughty high-altitude weather enthusiast. But much to America's concern, the Soviet Union appeared to be ahead in the space race. Everyone freaked out when Russia launched the world's first satellite, and then they actually sent a man into space. Even worse, there also appeared to be a missile gap in the Soviets' favor, and Khrushchev was so confident that he even allowed the US to set up a technology exhibit in Moscow, attended by a certain Vice President Richard Nixon. Check this out. We have color TV. Yes. but
Hello
we've been
from
to space
China.
Mexican.
Keep it up, Tommy.
Hello from China? You're not from China. I don't believe you. This is gonna sound weird, but it looks like that when the world is at Cold War, when there's rivalries, that helps technology, you know? You know, this race against the Russians. Oh, we have to beat the Russians. That really helped technology in a way, right?
Can obliterate you with
Especially
a massive
military and
nuclear
like
arsenal.
space and shit.
Check out this vegetable peeler. Tensions increased further when both sides upgraded their atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs, and after West Germany was allowed to join NATO in 1955, Khrushchev set up the Defensive Warsaw Pact, strengthening the military ties between the Soviet Union and its satellite states. In 1960, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected John F. Kennedy. The Soviet Union was advancing its technology, but it was also bleeding its coffers dry, and all of the money was going towards the military, not the people. Life under communism was still as hard as ever, and Berlin remained a thorn in the Soviet side. The contrast between the economically prosperous West and the struggling East was clearer day by day, and East Berliners were still able to freely travel to the West. Now, many of them were deciding to stay
that's
there.
when they built the
Millions
wall.
defected to West Germany via West Berlin, causing Eastern factories to lose workers and taking a heavy toll on the economy. Soviet leaders decided this couldn't continue any longer. First, Khrushchev tried this: leave West Berlin, or else. Or else what? Or else, I'll be really mad at you. Yeah, no, we're gonna stay. Listen, man, West Berlin is ours, East Berlin is yours. That's just how it is. Kennedy felt pretty good about his show of American resolve. But wait a second, did you catch that? Let's replay it.
East Berlin is yours.
Uh-oh, Kennedy just told Khrushchev that the USA wouldn't interfere in what the Soviets did with their section of Berlin, so Khrushchev came up with a new idea. We're gonna build a wall, and it's gonna be a big, beautiful wall, and it's gonna keep
Oh, that guy actually built a fucking wall, man. He built a fucking wall, man.
out all the Mexicans.
Goddamn.
Oh, sorry, it's gonna keep in all the Mexicans. On August 13th, 1961, Berliners woke up to find their city divided into two, with barbed wire and guards blocking the border between
Like, imagine that you live in Berlin and you wake up in the morning and suddenly they build a fucking wall, man. Jesus
East and
Christ.
West. Over time, a wall was constructed throughout the city. Families were torn apart. Thousands would risk their lives escaping over the
crazy,
wall,
bro.
and hundreds would die trying. To the despair of Berliners, the West were unable to do anything about it, but the wall did put on full display the failure of the communist system. As
And what always blows my mind about history, all this because the art school of Vienna did not accept fucking Hitler, man. All this because of that fucking art school's decision, man. Is that crazy how the butterfly effect is a real thing, man?
Kennedy said, democracy is not perfect, but we
You could also say, all this because that guy shot the Archduke of fucking Austria, man.
have never had to put a wall up to
Crazy,
keep our
bro.
people in. As part of the agreement between the two sides, US diplomats were still allowed to travel to East Berlin, but suddenly, East Berlin crossing guards started giving them the business, and Kennedy was like, nah-uh. In October, the US rolled tanks up to the crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie as a show of strength. The Soviets did the same, and the two were in a standoff. They stayed like that for 16 hours, and the world braced for nuclear Armageddon. Thankfully, though, Kennedy called Khrushchev directly and was like, hey man, this is getting way too hot. How about you back your tanks up?
Good, man. It's very good that these two men fucking... Dude, I'm gonna be anti-Trump again. Imagine Trump in that position. Imagine Trump in that position at this moment in time. You think he would call the other guy and be like, hey, we should chill the fuck out. My
Up by
damn.
an inch and we'll do the same. Sounds good. Okay, how about you back your tanks up by another inch and we'll follow suit. Alright, hey, you want to do another inch? And they both very slowly inched away from the apocalypse. Phew, let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I've heard that some of you are still not subscribed, man! What's this, man? After all these years of all this work? If you don't subscribe right now, I'm coming to you tonight. I know some of you are into that. Subscribe. Back to the video. Fucking watching you.
Was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community where you can learn just about anything. Support my channel by signing up using the link below and get your first 2 months for free. For anyone who thinks recent US history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s. Extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the
I don't think that's true. I once read the story, and all you crazy fucking history nerds can tell me that. People always think the Cuba Missile Crisis was the closest we ever died, but there's the story about this Russian submarine that got the order to launch the nuke, but the leader of that submarine said, "No, I'm not going to do it." You know what I'm talking about? Like, that guy saved the world. That's actually a true story, man. It's actually coming up. Oh, that's coming in the video. Okay.
CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin
that Russian guy,
America.
man,
A certain
literally
Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's...
What I never understood about Che Guevara, man, that guy killed people with an AK. He literally hunted gay people, but all these young fuckers, all these young liberals have Che Guevara shirts and Che Guevara tattoos. Aren't you guys for, like, queer rights, man? That guy literally hunted homosexuals, man. I never fucking understood that shit, man.
Summer playground, and America didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard. So the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro.
Bay of Pigs, I know that stuff. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan, so he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but they could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just going to suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange. Sir, you need to look at this photograph. You're right. That's the cutest dog I've ever seen. Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely vulnerable, and they...
I mean, that's scary, right? If you're like the American high command, that must scare the fuck out of you, man. There's suddenly missiles you didn't know they were there.
They knew that airstrikes or an invasion of Cuba would likely mean nuclear war with the Soviet Union, so Kennedy came up with another idea. A blockade. The US Navy announced it would stop and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba, and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The US did the same, and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides...
I asked my grandpa once about this, and he was... This is 61. He was born in... He was already in the army at that time, and I asked him about this day, and he was a pioneer in the East German army, and pretty much what he just said is that on that day, they were just very serious. They were very... No bullshit, everybody get ready for everything, pretty much. I remember that.
It broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed. And for the first time in history, US Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war. The Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and two of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the third senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize...
Dude, let's read that name. What a fucking man. Wait, I want to see his name. I can't see his name. Jesus Christ. Vasily Arkhipov. What a fucking Chad, dude. Holy shit. That dude deserves fucking monuments. There has to be a movie about this guy. There has to be one, right? Just tell me what it's called. What a
finalized
fucking human,
its preparations, man. And I kid you not, the day before the US were set to decide the day and time for the Cuban invasion, Khrushchev was like, hey, you know if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the two sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of relief, except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew! Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test ban treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev.
I had never heard of that guy. Thank you, Volant's life.
Both sides were deeply concerned at the prospect of nuclear war, but still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah,
I've never heard of that in my life. These videos are amazing. There's 4 hydrogen bombs in southeast Spain?
wouldn't.
Dude, imagine they would have blown up.
Are you breathing right now?
What?
Yeah, I wouldn't. It took the Americans 2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone missing in the ocean.
Oh
this
my
was the
God.
14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950.
The 14th time they lost a nuclear bomb. Fuck.
Nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam.
As I always say on stream, I was watching a huge documentary on the Vietnam War on Netflix, which is 12 hours long, and this Johnson guy looked very good. I always say that. This Johnson guy looked like a very good president. Very clever. That's just what I saw in the documentary. He looked very intelligent.
Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into 2. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators.
He was
and
a
both
fucking
dreamed
waiter
of
in Paris,
reuniting
man.
Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese
Also lots
to
of
deal
Chinese
with the
support.
threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more
Just put Vietnam on Netflix. It's super long, very in detail documentary. Very detailed. It's about how America fucked up and shit.
South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong. And over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking
10-year
point.
war,
America
man.
feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops. And so in they went. From 1965...
I'm sorry if I'm pausing. I don't just want to be a reactor. I want to do my own shit. Just some weeks ago, we watched Apocalypse Now, you know, the legendary movie. And when the main hero, Martin Sheen, reaches the rogue general of Marlon Brando, he finds a letter from Marlon Brando. And Marlon Brando went rogue because he didn't believe in the war anymore. And what he said in the letter is, this war is lost. The only way to win this war is if the American soldiers feel connected to Vietnam. Like the problem, and that was really intelligent, he proposed that it's wrong to bring American soldiers in and they leave after 2 years. You will need soldiers that speak the language, that really live in Vietnam and become Vietnam, you know? That was there's a name for this doctrine. That was very clever, I felt, actually, in that movie, man.
itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him?
Oh, you did.
Of course not. That's because millions of
Right
young
side.
American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle.
Yeah, that's also what was in the letter. They didn't send elites. They sent young men into the fucking jungle, man. No wonder this is not gonna work, man. You needed elite troops that were trained and ready to stay in Vietnam for many, many years, man.
As its
Big
shield.
mistake, bro.
It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city
fucking
of Saigon
sucks, dude.
found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it
That's a
justice
war you
in
could
this
study
video, but in
for
terms
years,
of the
man.
Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many, many global conflicts that signaled a turning point.
Nowadays, there's a lot of Vietnamese people in Germany. There's a shit ton of Vietnamese people in Germany because they fled off that war.
Under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive. And as a result, their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world. In the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between
Wait, there was
Somalia
Cubans in Africa? What?
and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed, and the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard, funding the famous Contra groups to fight the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower
Dude, look at
intervention
that.
amplified the
Fuck,
destruction
man.
and created alarming levels of human suffering throughout
That's
the
crazy.
Third World. And in Vietnam, that human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old
So that's the first time American public found out what's going on, right? Because there was no internet and no TV so much. And they found out what's going on, and then the summer of
television. Going into
68
the late
started.
60s, America was a changing nation. This became this. This became this. And this became this. The new slogan that was taking root: make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected
Nixon.
law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be increasingly unwinnable, and public opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home, and ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam by 1973.
Such a long war, man.
2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers.
Was Ho Chi Minh still alive when they won? Man, they must have had a big celebration. Imagine you're the Viet Cong and you fight for 10 years and then you win a war against the mighty USA. He was dead already, okay. These Viet Cong must have been very joyful, man, that day.
In Russia, a huge
Yeah, like
percentage
2
of the
to 3
budget
years
was
before
still
that.
going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending in order to rescue their economies, and so both welcomed with open arms an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as détente. To improve relations, Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit Moscow in
Oh, wow, that's a
1972,
big thing.
and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were even improving via ping-pong
Vietnam has
diplomacy
2
when
wins
the
over
US
2
table tennis team
superpowers.
went on a
Sure,
tour
man.
of the People's Republic. However,
But they
internally,
paid a heavy
China
price,
was still
man.
pushing
1 million Viet Cong died for, what, 200,000 US soldiers? No, that's wrong. How many US soldiers? Only 58,000, but a lot of wounded. That's a lot of wounded, man. America lost 58,318, and Viet Cong lost pretty much 1 million. That is a crazy KD, bro. Even Chinese and North Koreans died. 14 North Koreans died. Damn. That's a heavy price.
anti-capitalist propaganda, which led to some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
You put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism. Pussy!
The 1968 election was the closest the USA came to civil war since World War II. Look it up.
Okay, I believe you. I'm not gonna look it up. Thank you for the 5, man. Okay, I'm way too loud, by the way. Okay. You mean since 2020? I'm farting a lot, guys. I'm still farting.
Everything was going great for Nixon, until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and violating constitutional protocol.
Watergate.
I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Wow, you mean in America that people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption? And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is.
This is so good, man. We're living in a TV show, bro.
After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna, where they signed yet another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But that's not to say there was no longer any tension between the
Fucking
two
Jimmy.
sides, because there was. Heaps of it. Once again, the Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games...
The response was that the USA made the Taliban trained by CIA soldiers, which will then later cause 9/11, which is so weird. Because the CIA is so involved with the Taliban.
Games were boycotted.
Anyway,
Conservatives
lower
were
your
concerned
voice,
that US policy had become too soft. And in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism. So they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came
was
in
an actor,
guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea. The Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally China had broken down. Relations
Really?
took a big hit in 1983
Why?
when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Coming into office in 1985, he was the real game changer. His philosophy differed a lot from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to find satisfaction in their work, because they weren't allowed to speak freely and lived in fear. Gorbachev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but unlike previous Soviet leaders, he actually made the change happen. Within the first couple of years, he began the political movement for more...
Oh, Gorbachev is still alive, right? I think there was an interview because he watched Chernobyl, the TV
openness
show.
and transparency, and
I
the
heard that.
restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems.
That
And
is
change
Reagan
very
Glasnost. I
quickly
had that
took
in school.
effect. People could criticize the government, they could enjoy Western pop culture, the media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the...
Mikhail Gorbachev was in a Pizza Hut commercial. Fuck off. What is going on this planet? Pizza Hut, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Это Горбачев.
Горбачев.
Это из-за него у нас
That's
в
a real
экономике
Russian, man.
бардак.
Да благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспективы.
Политическая
It's like
нестабильность.
Twitch chat.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть Pizza Hut.
Did Pizza Hut just save the world? I can't fucking handle this anymore.
The West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated,
man.
which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades, the Soviets had been brutally suppressing any attempt at change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow.
There is a
Gorbachev's
sunken
response, he didn't
Soviet
necessarily-
nuclear sub in the South Pacific with armed nuclear weapons and can't be recovered because it would leak radiation into ocean currents.
And he fucking links me like an official paper. Okay, cool. There's a nuclear submarine in the Pacific. Cool. Thank you for the free. Gee, what the fuck? I feel like literally I'm in a South Park
agree
episode
with the
here.
reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future. This was massive, and the Hungarian leaders began planning free, multi-party elections. Poland followed suit and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still...
Dude, I just talked to Lisa's dad like last weekend and I asked him about old stuff. And he told this story. He was a young man and he had a job. And right before the wall fell, like 2 or 3 years before that, Lisa's dad had to go to the army building because they were putting everyone in the army. And he was walking in. And he will literally, he says the story all the time. You will sit here, one guy there, and one guy behind you. And they will fucking ask you, do you want to serve your country duty for the communist cause? And he will say, and they will really try to get him. And he will say, no, I'm a pacifist. I do not want to shoot people. And they would go mad. They would go crazy. They would literally go, get out, you piece of shit. Genosse Honecker is not proud of you. Like really crazy shit, man. Dude, they will almost beat him up, man. He was just running out, bro. This is cool. This is real stories, man. And if I talk to my parents and stuff, they all hated Honeycomb, man. They don't talk so well about him.
They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was furious and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling, and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy garden.
My best friend in school, true story, his parents were right here. They were storming the embassy.
And a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit. Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control. And worse, the biggest demonstration...
And that demonstration started right here in Leipzig, 1989. Volksaufstand Leipzig.
Was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force. Right, guys? Guys? Unfortunately, everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over 500,000 East Germans took to the streets of East Berlin. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights. That damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction,
there must have been a fucking sick moment,
were allowed to pass through. East and West Berliners couldn't believe it and celebrated together throughout the night. Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later,
that's
Germany
my parents' generation, man. They still talk about
elections
this shit.
in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist authority in the Eastern Bloc. America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen. The anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate. Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev
fucked himself, but that made him a hero in a way.
Elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic. But it went a little bit like this. The Soviet Union was made up of a number of smaller Soviet republics, the largest of which was Russia. Yeltsin got himself elected the president of Russia, and began a struggle for sovereignty against Gorbachev and the greater Soviet Union. Communist hardliners were horrified at what Gorbachev was allowing, so they briefly kidnapped him and tried to set up their own emergency government. But Yeltsin and his supporters all gathered around the White House in Moscow and were like,
I didn't even know.
We have a tank. So the hardliners had to concede and released Gorbachev. Wow. Thanks, Boris. That was a close one. No problem. And thanks to you for all the great freedom you've given us. Anytime, pal. And just to inform you, I've used that freedom you've given us to go behind your back and make a deal with Ukraine and Belarus to dissolve the Soviet Union and set up the Russian Federation. In other words, you're no longer in charge.
Thank you, got power gaming, man. Thank you.
Dude. So uncool. And so decades of tension and the everlasting threat of nuclear war finally came to an end as democratic governments were established in many of the old Soviet
until Mr. Putin come along,
republics, and the world got along together forever after. Right, guys?
Right, guys? Why Merkel? What? Well, she's kind of the Führer of the EU.
Hey, this modern art thing is growing on me. Where can I learn to do that?
On Skillshare. Dude, this is an amazing channel. Well, I think we're gonna react to this more often. Guys, American... Dude, I want to watch more of this, but I want to play Call of Duty now. I mean, this is a nice view count, but I don't give a shit. Man, this is great. We should do this more often, man. You guys seem to love that. All this could have been avoided if they had just known about Skillshare. I'm unsubscribing from Oversimplified. No, we have a tank. This is an amazing channel, man. Let's subscribe, man. Really cool. I want to watch more of this, but let's play Call of Duty now, man. If I can. If I may. When you talk to people that saw this war, you see how much pain is in their eyes and how unnecessary this all was. As I said before, all these wars are always by crazy leaders, man. It's just the leaders.
She slipped in my fingers like sand. Heard that she had a man. just sitting here sad. Oh well, ship sail. She slipped through my fingers like sand. Further she out of hand. Now I'm just sitting here sad.